Introducing Thomson Reuters Co-Counsel Legal, the comprehensive legal AI platform built for end-to-end legal work. Fast-track your legal research guided by trusted practical law and Westlaw content. Analyze thousands of documents and extract key information. Accelerate drafting. Co-Counsel Legal UK. One platform. End-to-end legal work.
Welcome to Talking Tech with Legal IT Insider. I'm your host, Caroline Hill, and today I'm here with Olly Bethell, who's Chief Technology Officer at Travers Smith. Olly's responsible for all things technology at Travers and previously held senior roles at Freshfields, including Interim Chief Technology Officer. And today we're going to be talking about AI at the firm and also some of the key trends that we're seeing in the industry, including the prevalence of GenAI tools, what that means for legal tech, and we're going to be having a look at governance and a number of different topics. Olly, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me in your podcast studio.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. Great to see you this morning.
So, Travers, you've always had one of the more innovative tech teams, in my opinion, and I think that you've been at the forefront of AI in legal for many years. So recent examples include you launched Etitona, which is your open source data labeling software. You launched that in 2024. And I know that you won Best AI in Legal, an award at CogX. You've been recognized over the years. So it's really great today to chat to you not only about your take on some of the tools that you're looking at internally, not necessarily specific tools, but the approach that you're taking to AI, but also some of the trends within the industry. Obviously, there's a massive focus on GenAI. We're seeing change like never before. So I'm really looking forward to running through your thoughts on some of the key developments that we're talking about. But before we launch into that, talk me through. So let's take a quick look at Travers' AI journey, as you might call it. Let's talk us through that because people may not be overly familiar with you or the tech stack at Travers.
Yeah, sure. Look, again, thanks for having me on the show. So we've been, I think, on quite an interesting journey with this for several years. So we started out back in 2019 when we have a fantastic team at Travers, and we were lucky to have Sean Curran come and join us. Sean built the legal tech team and was always really interested early on about what opportunities there would be from building, and hired some great engineering talent and started out by building the product Etitona, which you talked about, which was initially a document or labeling platform. So the idea that could we extract clauses, isolate them and label them to build a corpus of knowledge to then be able to identify those clauses in new contracts, similar to what products like Luminance and Kira were doing at the time. Fascinating project, and the team managed to build a database of around 250,000 clauses that have been labeled. And it was starting to really get some traction. I think it was around the time the technology was just starting to work. And as you said, we open sourced it as well, which led to a CogX award for the team, which was fantastic because that's outside of the legal industry and cross tech. And just as that was starting to work, and actually one interesting anecdote is that it's the same idea that Scale AI had. So Scale AI started at a similar time and recently sold half the business to Meta for $14 billion. So who knows what Etitona could have become. But I vividly remember late 2022 being in a pub just up the road with Sean, and we were chatting about this new technology that had just come. Everyone was talking about ChatGPT and this idea that you could describe something you wanted and the text would come back. And we were kicking around this idea of what if you could identify a clause and then you could say, make that more aggressive or make it stricter or make it more commercial and then have it rewrite. And we really loved this idea. And Sean took it away and suddenly realized the huge potential of what ChatGPT was about to become. The other thing we tried was, what if we gave it some of the clauses that Etitona had been able to just start to identify and see if ChatGPT could identify them? Of course, it did like that. So there was 2-3 years of work just jettisoned. But I mean, of course, the technology didn't exist before then. So the team then did a hard pivot and set to seeing, okay, well, what do we need to do as a firm? And I think we all recognized that the technology was in its infancy. It wasn't ready for any kind of production rollout, but it was really important that we gave the firm access to it to be able to learn, to research, to understand what it was capable of, but do it within guardrails, because there wasn't a lot of understanding about training data going into train the underlying models. There wasn't a huge amount of understanding about data privacy, about the risk of hallucination, about the risk of putting client data in and over-reliance. So the team built what became YCMBot, so an internal chatbot with lots of technical guardrails in it to help protect people, not to do stupid things. We did a lot of training with people, and that built some great momentum internally. That was 2023. Built the Analyze tool, which was the idea of, could you pivot that? So could you use the model to ask lots of questions and lots of documents? And that was a tool called Analyze, and you could see the genesis of where it could go. And it was around that time that the team left and went and set up a company called Gilo. Went and built Gilo, and then we bought that as a customer, and we rolled that product out firm-wide. And it's been amazing to see what that's become internally, and that's just grown. And actually, I was looking at some of the usage data, and in the last couple of weeks, we've just seen adoption just hockey stick. So it's really, really starting to take off with some of the new models. So from Etatona and kind of the early R&D 5 years ago to where we are now has just been phenomenal.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we're going to come on to talk to dive more into the buy versus build, and that's a perfect example, isn't it, of where this build, you can, because of the speed of development, can be quite tricky. But before we do that, so thanks for that. That's really, really helpful. In terms of sort of looking at your wider strategy, obviously you have been very progressive. You have built a lot of tools, but obviously you also use, it's not like you use common tools like common document management, etc. Tell everyone, what does your tech stack look like before we then dive into more, how you're going to move on and how you're going to look at build versus buy.
Sure. So at Travers, we've got a pretty, probably what is fairly common among law firms these days, certainly ones where the data privacy allows for it, which is a SaaS-based cloud-first strategy. So all of our line of business, system of record, depending on what you call them, those systems are all either moved to or in the process of moving to cloud. Our document management system, all of those obvious large systems are there now already. So we benefit from the investment that those suppliers are able to make in developing their tools. And I think it's an interesting point with what we are all reading about in the press at the moment about the cybersecurity impact of some of the new models. Maybe we'll touch on that later. But those products are not always going to meet all of our needs. So sometimes there are certain capabilities that we need. And we've still got a great engineering team at the firm. And they built some fantastic products, even in the last couple of years, where we're able to solve certain discrete problems that can't be fulfilled by the tools that we have. And that's quite a key part of our strategy and the philosophy of the team, is to have great engineering talent within the team to be able to solve problems with an engineering mindset. So we still have a balance between buy versus build. Again, I think for a lot of what we do, that the products that are available on the market can fulfill our needs, especially as they're developing so quickly now. But I think there's an interesting thing that's emerging, which is now, and we've all seen the share price of a lot of software businesses has started to take a bit of a hit. The release of Claude Code and these new coding models means that one thing is probably true, and that's the cost of building software is trending down. So either it may be that we want to build something where previously it was too expensive, too complex to do it, or actually our vendors can respond far quicker. And if you take Gilo as an example, the cadence, the velocity of features that are getting added to that platform over just the last few months has been phenomenal, as all these vendors are able to benefit from the new tools that they've inherited. Similarly, our own engineers are able to extract value from those tools as well and can ship features quicker as well.
I'm seeing such an interesting shift towards that. There's obviously different peaks and troughs in the market in terms of these sorts of trends of buy versus build. But I feel like there's a lot more firms for obvious reasons looking to build their own tools. I feel like one thing that I'm not sure that people are factoring in, I'd love to get your take, is that, and we'll dive more into the Anthropics and Claude side of it, but just as a general observation, I think that people don't, in my opinion, people aren't necessarily factoring in a few things like so there's the time that it takes in terms of the cost. So people go, it might be cheaper for us to build it. that they might not be factoring in the time, the expertise, and then obviously there's the maintenance. Are you creating some kind of like Frankenstein that when those people involved in the dev leave, there's then how do you maintain it? How do you make sure that it's not? I mean, I'd love to get your take on that, because I'm having these conversations in the market where a lot of firms are looking to build for obvious reasons. You want to capitalize on your own expertise. You want to differentiate yourself. It's like if you're just using legal Gen AI tools, how are you really creating that, leveraging that special sauce, secret sauce, etc. But there's a lot of challenges around builds. I'd love to get your take on what you're seeing.
Well, I'll reference some of your market data. So you published a report end of last year, the top 200, which is one of the richest data sets around for what different firms have been procuring, buying, doing with their technology estates. And it's interesting looking at that, where the second most popular solution for Gen AI is actually bespoke. Right. So people building their own. Yeah. That's what we did originally with TS Bot, and then we pivoted to a buy strategy. I think there's a couple of reasons why you might choose to go down that road. I guess the question is, are you able to, if building your own gives you some sort of competitive advantage because you're able to do something with your data in a way that you can't by using a off-the-shelf product, then I can see the advantage of that. Of course, one of the realities is all of these products are using the same underlying model. So really what you're differentiating on is the user interface layer. And the big products that are out there are all kind of converging on a similar set of features. So the question is, can you develop quickly enough to keep up with those companies that are specialist in building that software? Or has your business got a specific requirement that means that actually you want to take that product in a different direction? Actually, I think both strategies are quite valid, and you can make a really valid business case for both, particularly if you've invested in building your own solution and you've got a lot of traction internally. Then pivoting away from that could be challenging, because you're going to lose time as you get everyone trained up on a new solution at a time where you just need to be solely focused on adoption. So I think what is going to be really interesting is those firms that have got talented engineering teams that can build quickly, benefit from the new technology that's coming down the line. They could be quite competitive, I think. And again, that's why we think it's really important to have that talent in the team.
Yeah, it's a good point, because some firms just don't have the resource, right? And then they're leaning on vendors. I speak to firms that are leaning on vendors, and vendors are running like 100 miles an hour. They want to be business partners, and it's great actually. They're being more responsive, than perhaps I've seen them ever in terms of developing. Obviously there's challenges around that if they're sort of trying to develop everything that everyone asks for. But let's then talk about, so you mentioned Anthropic and obviously Claude's legal plugin, which caused a lot of excitement and saw the SaaS software market plummet. I've got different thoughts on that. We could perhaps dive into that. I do think, this perception that data is not a moat is curious, but anyway. But I mean, you can respond.
A couple of thoughts. I mean, if you're any big law firm is going to need access to high quality legal data services, like obviously there's quite a few of those, but companies that had their share price hit as a result of those plugins. But I don't think any large law firm in their right mind is going to give up on having access to those to those data sources. I think what will be interesting is to see those companies at the moment they've got a kind of perimeter, a firewall around how you access it, which is only through their user interface. So it will be interesting to see if those companies decide to offer an integration into your platform of choice. So one of the things that we hear is our lawyers spending more and more time in Gilo, and that is one of the user interfaces that they have up all of the time. And so is there a way that they can get access to that data so they can use the Gilo front end rather than having to jump out into other systems? So it'd be interesting to know whether that is something that those companies are considering. Claude generally, their growth is just astonishing, right? So end of last year, $9 billion ARR, now $30 billion ARR. On some metrics now bigger than OpenAI, and who would have predicted that 18 months ago? I think when I speak to clients, it's interesting how a lot of them are picking up on that as a direction of travel. we as a law firm that operates obviously across the globe, but does a lot of work in Europe, we wouldn't entertain using a system that is processing in the US. So there are limitations around that. But what we are able to do is benefit from the Claude models through Gylo because they're hosted in AWS in the EU, and we've seen a real jump in performance as a result of making those models default in our organization. The feedback we're getting is fantastic. So I think I can see a world where because people are enjoying using these models and the value they get back, they almost accept some trade-off with the user interface, that they might lean less on some of the proprietary legal tech tools that are out there.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. So does being able to access it through Gylo overcome, obviously in terms of how you talk about the interface, one of the things that lawyers aren't good at is swapping platforms, right? You've spent years trying to create one place where they interact, so you haven't got multiple passwords, etc. Then you're going to start looking at external tools like Claude. The Claude plugin you can't surface it in Word, is my understanding still.
No, although interestingly, they have just launched Anthropic have launched a Claude Word add-in.
So that could be huge,
so,
right?
So that's huge.
Yeah, because it's about that interface, isn't it? If you can access it in the way, in the sort of the workflow, your normal
bringing the
workflow.
AI.
Yeah, exactly. So that's quite interesting. That will probably make a big difference in terms of accessibility.
I think so. Again, we use the Gylo Word add-in, and we get that value. There are obviously a lot of legal tech businesses that are focused around just having that user interface inside Word.
Yeah.
And I think, speaking to, I know some people that are closer to Anthropic, their intention isn't to try to destroy other markets. They're just trying to build helpful software.
Yeah.
But they've become so enormous now that any new feature release suddenly gets interpreted as market domination. But again, I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because I'm not sure that I think clients will start to extract value from it. I think law firms will be more cautious because of the need to have more guardrails, to be more thoughtful about the use of the technology. So tools that are geared up for more of the legal workflow would make sense, because we think about data privacy, where the processing is happening, or information security barriers, all of those sensible things that we need to build into the software that we're using. But the fact that the models are now getting so good, my feeling is it's gone from imagine if it could do this is where it's going to go to, it actually works now. Yeah, I think that's the shift that I've seen in the last couple of months.
Could you explain to people, so just as one example, how are people accessing the plugin through Gylo? Like what might that look like to a user?
So in Word, there is an add-in on the right-hand side, and then you can ask the model to summarize the document, ask questions about it, suggest markups. So you can just instruct it like an assistant, and it will act on the document for you. So either giving you answers within the add-in on the right-hand side, or actually directly making changes into the document, which is fantastic. And
so you can literally just access it straight through Gylo.
Correct. But of course, we've trained everybody in the firm to ensure that any changes that are made, they are checking them to make sure that they're accurate. And there was something in the FT, I don't know if you saw in the FT this morning, Sullivan and Cromwell getting into hot water for hallucinations in documents that are submitted to court. So just another example of the importance of making sure that you check the changes that are being made. It's more, I guess, the efficiency of finding what needs to be updated in a document, and then making the relevant changes and checking them.
And that resolves some of the governance issues that you would be concerned about using the plugin, just if you were to just outside of...
We're principles first, so ultimately you are still responsible for the output. That's not changed since ChatGPT came out in 2022.
We had so much fun over the years with hallucinations. I think just the ability, to talk to... There's so much improvement in the tech in terms of being able to go straight to the source, right? So citations are going to be really important, and being able to just check on the spot. I think that's going to be so interesting as well in terms of who's doing what tasks, like in terms of the workflow and how people work. So do you think, obviously we talked about the plugin. I have spoken to clients, and they are, you know, the ones again in-house teams, the ones with developed resources internally are sort of playing around with it and looking at it quite seriously, which I think is really interesting. But do you think, how do you think, as a general observation, so there's a huge excitement about general AI tools, and then what impact do you think that's having on people's perception? Perhaps over the years we've talked about things like Microsoft SharePoint, right? This is not the first time. I feel like sometimes we think that this is the first time we're having any of these conversations about big tech versus legal tech, which obviously for all of us who've been in the industry a really long time, there's been lots of conversations about mainstream tech, legal tech, etc. I feel like it's obviously resurrecting in terms of Gen AI. Now you're looking at, you know, what's the impact going to be of, for example, Claude, but there are others. You know, you talked about ChatGPT. What's the impact going to be on legal tech?
Yeah.
Excuse me, and the need for legal tech.
I think to answer a slightly different question is the impact of generative AI, or this generation of AI, really on businesses. One of my observations is I wonder if there has previously been a belief that work is zero sum, like there's a finite amount of work. And if we can just find ways to get through that work quicker, then we'll get through the working day faster, or we'll need fewer people. But actually, I think history has shown us that whenever we create some new technology that creates efficiency, then we just end up with more and more and more. I mean, it's a version of Jevons paradox that obviously a lot of people talk about, but the advent of email didn't mean that we just sent the same number of emails as we sent letters. It's like we reduced all that friction. Or how many WhatsApps do you get that you somebody's idea suddenly results in a WhatsApp message on your phone straight away? And so we just see this volume increase. And I think for all of so we might analyze way more contracts, or we might research more sources of data to create research reports, and off the back of that suddenly spins off more work and more work and more work. It's like it's a sort of multiplying force. So I feel like we are definitely benefiting from the efficiency, but we're just generating more volume of work. And I wonder if one of the tipping points might be a point where we generate so much work, so much output, that it becomes almost impossible, commercially possible, for humans to be able to check all of that output. That's going to be one of the tipping points. And what are we automating with this? So I was listening to Benedict Evans last night, and he was comparing elevator attendants with accountants. So stay with me here, which is there were hundreds of thousands of elevator attendants in the United States in the mid 20th century, and then they got replaced by automated elevators. So a button replaced what they did. And then in the 70s and 80s, you had the rise of spreadsheets, and yet there have been more and more accountants year on year. So actually, what is the thing that we're automating? Is that the output? Is that the thing that people are buying? So when it comes to elevators, the thing was moving up and down, and that could be fully replaced by a button. But with accountancy, it's not the mathematics, the spreadsheet. It's the validation, the auditing, the outcome that people are paying money for. And I wonder if that's what's going to happen with legal services as well. Like, okay, there will be some tasks that get accelerated by this technology, but I think people are still going to be in demand for paying for the outcomes and the value and the judgment. And so what we're this is turning into a monologue, but what we're going to say, I think what we're going to see is we are going to be able to analyze and respond far quicker, but that is just going to generate more and more work and the more need for high quality legal services.
It's interesting. History has definitely shown us, hasn't it? I've been there through many of the phases, like where we went from fax to email, and then everything just got faster. Actually, so when you're in a corporate team, and whereas previously you might be able to do a piece of work and then go home, actually then you just have to wait for the email to come back. And so any kind of concerns over how that would impact jobs, I think you made an interesting point about the product, your work product versus your ability to check, to sort of almost like check it. I think I guess for firms, the challenge is to make sure that things are keeping aligned, right? So that the we're moving at light speed.
Yeah.
And actually, you need to make sure that developments are happening in a sustainable way, so that you're capable of. You've obviously got a very big focus, as all firms have, on checking your work.
Yeah.
But really, you've got to make sure that the technology is happening aligned with one another. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I'll tell you what's interesting is the sort of the asymmetry point. So in employment law in particular, there is a slight asymmetry in the sense of if you're dealing with employees that are using the technology to respond to a contentious employment case, they might not necessarily have the same obligation around the quality of the output that comes back as outside counsel do. So what I mean by that is, one of the things that our employment partners have observed is in certain contentious cases, historically, the response from a disgruntled employee might be a few questions. But now what can come back is scores, if not hundreds of questions that in lightning speed, because clearly that's been put through ChatGPT to generate all of these edge case complex questions that are largely based on employment law, but actually in some cases aren't entirely accurate. But then that comes to outside counsel, who then have an obligation to make sure they respond faithfully to that and thoughtfully. And that is just obviously takes more time to be able to do a good and accurate job of that. So there's now with where other firms have the same obligation to make sure of the accuracy, there's going to come a point where is it in the client's best interest to sort of generate more and more of this content? There needs to be a pragmatism applied, I think.
It's such a challenge, isn't it? I was hearing that the barristers are being inundated with I think it was the Bar Association was saying that there's just been this huge influx of court papers from individuals, armed with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
I think that the technology will, we will manage to find ways to cope with that, as we always do. One thing that I think comes up a lot in my conversations right now, and I had an interesting conversation about it just yesterday, which kind of spun it in a different light, was about orchestration. So this idea about, I called it and wrote about it recently, called it an innovation spine, which I'm not sure is necessarily the best way to describe it. But this idea that everything's moving so fast, but that firms need to create a way to orchestrate it, so that you almost have your workflow, your processes don't move to a certain extent, and within that you slot in your new technology. So it might be your legal AI tool or your GenAI tool, and then and the conversation I had yesterday was, and there are obviously vendors out there that are marketing this already, and from a governance perspective, it kind of appeals. But then someone pointed out to me yesterday that actually, and it's sort of wrap up with some closing thoughts, really, I suppose, that what we don't need is a bunch more that lawyers interact with Google really seamlessly, and they use it and they get great value out of it because it's really simple. And that what we don't need to do is start creating loads more complexity, and difficulty in using technology, because that will just be a deterrent and probably encourage people to use it in a way that we don't want them to use it. I don't know what your views are on that.
Well, there's obviously an emerging theme around vibe coding.
Yeah.
In relation to this. So 5-10 years ago, we had low code. This is, I guess, is almost the next evolution of that. So all of a sudden, the ability to be able to build these improvised pieces of software is suddenly democratized. Now, not everyone's going to want to do that, but there's lots of opportunity that comes with that. But in a way, one of the things with the larger software products, your document management systems, etc., is it's not so much the building of the software where the value is, but in understanding what needs to be done in a really consistent and predictable way. And when people are building improvised pieces of software, then it works for how their brain is wired. One of my observations often is you can tell a lot about a person by their inbox and how they organize. If you've got 1,000 subfolders or 10,000 emails in your inbox, I think everyone's somewhere on that sliding scale. So that's why document management is really challenging, because you're making everyone work in a uniform way. So we could have one world where there's a proliferation of these small improvised pieces of software which work the way one person wants it to work. But is that the best and most efficient way for the process to work? And I think where I suspect we'll start to get to, we talked about it a bit earlier, the cost of building software will come down. So we want to try and lower the barrier where someone's got a good idea and we can take that idea, we can turn it into something useful quickly. But we also need to validate it and make sure that that's the right way of doing it. There's all the guardrails around building enterprise software so that it's high quality, it's robust, it can be maintained. But most importantly is it fits in with a process that we want our lawyers to be following. So we want to be able to take their inspiration, but kind of fit it into a process that makes commercial sense. So I think that's the trade-off that we've got to figure out. So it's really building the processes around that.
I do think it's excellent that we've got to a stage though now where you can access the knowledge that's in people's heads more easily. That challenge that we've had over the years of having to have that sort of interpreter, and now you're facilitating people actually being able to use the knowledge in their head without that need for too much tech in the middle.
Yeah, I think, this is not my original thought, but you can see a world where product managers and software developers start to converge, because it's more about understanding the requirements better than it is necessarily about building the software. And I can see a world where we move to this idea of almost having surgeries where you can come in with an idea and then that can be developed rapidly to get to a prototype that can be tested. Yeah. I'm really excited about that opportunity.
So much excitement, and unfortunately we're at time.
Thanks, Karen.
It's so great chatting with you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.